Welcome to the Hello, I'm Grieving podcast. I am your host, Dr. Julie Shaw, founder of Hello, I'm Grieving, a community where we focus on acknowledging and dealing with grief to live a full life. Our tagline, Say Hello to Grief, emphasizes the importance of mindfully and courageously acknowledging and engaging with grief so we can find hope, lessons, motivation, and healing in the midst of our pain. So today we have the opportunity to say hello to Roshni Kavate. So hello, Roshni.
Hey,
How are
Julie. Great to be here.
you? Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again for giving your time because as we were just chatting before, you are in Barcelona. So it is the evening for you. And love that you are living out there and experiencing that and spending your time between California and Barcelona. So I'm going to read your quick bio here. So Roshni is an artist, grief coach, and educator, and is the founder and CEO and creative director of Marigolde. She believes grief is a portal to wholeness. Through rituals and storytelling, we can reconnect to our origins and be our wild selves. I love that part. She sees the path to being whole as a radical art and political practice. The question that guides her is, what is our grief craving and how can we nourish and feed it? So Roshni earned a BS in nutritional sciences from UC Berkeley, a BS in nursing from NYU with honors, and Ayurveda postpartum caregiver training from the Center for Sacred Window Studies. She is also trained in urban Zen integrative yoga therapy to provide complementary holistic care to people with serious illness. And Roshni has over a decade of nursing experience in both clinical and leadership positions, working with diverse populations in New York City, Los Angeles, and Oakland. Her work has spanned from working as a birth doula, transplant ICU nurse, home health nurse, and to an end of life nurse. Most recently, she worked as a palliative care nurse at Kaiser Permanente in Oakland. And Roshni's early childhood was marked by the grief of her mother and ancestors experienced by living on the margins based on gender and caste. Similarly, in the United States, as a nurse, Roshni witnessed racialized trauma and its lasting impact on the health and wellness of communities of color. Combining her interest in art, wellness, and advocacy, she has launched Marigolde to reimagine what it means to embody our freedom and live in our pleasure. So that was so many great things and I mean, I feel like you have lived a life and even being able to see how you've been a birth doula and end of life doula to really show that you have been witness to this true cycle of life. So I'm really glad to have you here and impart all of your wisdom with us today.
That sounded so exciting when you read it. So thank you for the enthusiasm. I was like, who's that?
Yes, it's not always interesting when people read bios, especially
Yeah.
the wild self. So actually, as you say that, I want you to explain that. Like, tell us about wild selves because when we're talking about grief, I mean, I love it because who thinks about being our wild selves as we're grieving? So tell us why those particular words and that adjective to describe it.
I think it came from this deep desire to just break out of the conformity, the world, the shell I was living in. My life felt so small and strict and I didn't even choose it. I realized like it was just put upon me and I just decided, "Oh, I'm going to be this very small, you know, trying to accommodate everyone and live on the margins and be small and not be big, take up space, dream big." And when I was a palliative care nurse, every day we would, talk with families and patients and ask them, what are you hoping for or what are you craving? And really the answer was, this is not life, the way we live life. They were referring to the kind of, career and money focused lifestyle, at least in the US, it's all work, barely any rest or forget pleasure, right? There's so much guilt associated with pressure or pleasure. And that sense of pressure to conform, to perform, And it just felt, I just wanted to break free of that. I wanted to be an artist, dream, bring all of my different parts, the creative self, the nurse self, the scientist part of me, the artist, the cook self, the one with the big feelings, like all of it. I
Yeah.
didn't want to sort of behave and typecast myself into what the world thought of me. So I think that was a desire to be just wild and free and not tame ourselves into these identities that that are not even ours, and
Yeah.
for the making. Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you. Already, just in the first few minutes, I'm like, there's so many good talking points there. And I hope people that are listening are really inspired by that because I really took all that in. And it makes me even think about how you talk about this dreaming big. I would like to say that I'm a dreamer. And it's interesting because as we're grieving, and maybe this is something that maybe you've witnessed in your own experience personally, but then also as you have been a palliative care nurse, is how do you get people to understand that they can still dream big, whether it is they are on the precipice of death or they are in intense grief, right? They're in that acute grief. Or maybe even if they're in that, they've moved out of acute grief and they're just trying to wonder and to be in that wonderment of how can I dream big?
Wow. I think I'm speechless at your question. um so I think I've been thinking about this a lot, where does this desire and almost this craving to dream big comes from. I think we have to look to our past, as people of color and a lot of us displaced. I think it's just in our blood, in our experience, even though we may not, consciously think about it every day. It's a sixth sense. We just feel it, that the people we come from, our ancestors, were survivors. So we're product of survival. We're product of, this desire for safety. We're a product of wanting secure attachment. So our life is the complete opposite, right? We've been kind of hungry for secure attachment. We've been hungry for safety. And when you grow up in that sense of, I'll take any small opportunity. I just want things to be, I'll take anything. When you come from that energy, it's really hard to dream big. It's unsafe. It goes against our biology and survival. But
That
I think,
thanks. Yeah.
yeah, and we talk about ancestral healing or reclamation, and for me, the greatest gift is to dream big, to kind of release that fear and to build that trust in this. On one hand, we come from struggle and survival, but that's also resilience and proof
Yeah.
that we are wildly creative, we're resourceful. Like I just imagine, like what would have my life been like if my family hadn't struggled? Like amazing. Like I already feel so grateful and have done so many wonderful things, and there is so much beauty in my life, but I just imagine, wow, like imagine how boundless, the possibility would have been for us. And I don't want to hold on to that regret. I think that's the opportunity we have. And I did notice, living in the US, you live your life in this very narrow focus of safety, of which and success. And success means safety, and that is usually money, and that's tied to this like kind of so-called career where again you're afraid, oh, no one will hire me, I'm afraid. You're just living in this fear cycle, and then you don't have ownership, you don't get to create, and you're just beholden to someone else always approving or disapproving you. And I think that's the other thing. We've always been at the mercy of someone else's approval.
Yeah.
And I think to dream big means, is to create your own vocabulary for what that looks like. And a lot of times it's opting out of that system of performance. It can just be, radical simplicity. It could just be pleasure. It could just be like, I'm just sleeping in. I'm just gonna, eat what I want. And we laugh about it, but that truly is radical because we don't have to conform to what grieving looks like. And
It's freedom.
yeah, it's freedom to just, and that doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to eat my feelings or I'm going to work out intensely. It's just you can exist in the continuum of what your body is desiring, what your bandwidth is. And I think that's the gift.
And even that desire to change, right? That understanding that when you learn from death or an extreme loss, an impactful loss, that you may have that desire to change, to shift, to pivot, however you want to talk about it, right? To reimagine what your life could be. And those could be your wildest dreams. Those could be these big moments that maybe you thought weren't for you, that you thought was for somebody else, or but now it's understanding how grief can give us that big shift in our lives that then show us, what is really important and what I've been reckoning with this new thought of like, what are the lies that people have told us?
Everything, everything, everything.
Lies, all lies.
All of it, all of it.
And so the undoing of all those lies can be a trip. And it takes time to undo that and to unlearn that and to figure out, what is for me and like how can I really truly show up, how I want to show up. And which I feel like are probably a lot of the lessons that you mentioned earlier, and you've probably learned a lot more being an end of life nurse in seeing how people either they have that understanding late in life, right? Or in those moments and being able to witness that, I'm sure through your own grief, but also witnessing others that you've been able to really create the life that you want. And I feel like you do that, right? Like even how I mentioned at the top of the call, like you're living where you want to live, you're doing what you want to do. Not to say that it's all easy, but you are taking those steps to really create that life that you want.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute misconception that you can sort of change everything about your life, right? And imagine, oh, things will be so much better. And I've fallen into that trap. I thought, oh, I'll leave my job. And what a privilege, right? To say, like, you know what? I don't want this job. I'm going to leave. But then, being an entrepreneur, especially a creative one, empathetic, sensitive one, and trying to do it in a way that's artistic and political, some days I go, okay, I really just want a job like where I just show up and people tell me what to do and I don't have to think about anything. I don't want to make any decisions. I don't want to think of, complicated answers. And I would say, well, what is it? Dark night of the soul moment. I mean, that's been the last 3 years building this business and community for me. So dreaming big is also exhilarating. It's also really painful. And every day, if it's helpful for people to hear it, you read that bio and I felt so like, oh, that feels so good. But beneath it is also a lot of doubt every day,
Yeah, people
even
need
in this moment. I'm like, am I doing this or doing the right thing? Like, why am I working so hard? Why am I trying something, that maybe is not really working in the way I imagined? But, I think you have to balance stability and also this kind of unknown, hold both of those pieces. Because I think ultimately you don't want to regret. And I think that I saw that so clearly. If there was one thing I saw every day was people trying to reconcile, regrets in their life. And I'll tell you, it was not about how many followers they have or if they went viral or not. It was relationships. And did I, pursue the dreams I wanted? It wasn't even about the money. Like money helped. but it was really how deeply connected and loved you felt. And, did you try and do the things you always wanted? So I
Yeah.
think I want to live a life where I have that sense of completion, where I can exhale and say, I tried building this beautiful, crazy business.
Mhm.
Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't work, but I met people like you. I've met so many incredible people around the world. I would have never met any of them. Um, like I'm finally, back being an artist again. Like I was at a museum eating mangoes and leading this mango ritual. Like that's my life now. It just sounds
I love it.
wild, but it's also possible. And yeah, it's both at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, when you said if people need to hear this, yes, they do. They do need to hear this. I need to hear this. So I'm glad that you said that today. And it really truly is a message that I need to hear. And so I just want to validate that. And I know so many other people need to hear it too. And to be able to learn these lessons from someone like you who has seen it firsthand, there's so much, like I said earlier, like so much wisdom in that. I wanted to, like with Hello, I'm Grieving, the tagline is say hello to grief. And for me, the way that I've always explained it, because some people are like, I don't want to say hello to grief. I don't want to recognize it. But that's the point, right? Is that when we say hello to grief, that is a acknowledgement that we are even grieving, that like this is having an impact on our life. And like you said, how can we get to those wild selves if we don't even recognize it or move towards acceptance? And acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that I'm fine with what happened. It's just like I know that that is the reality, and what can I do with that knowledge now? So I want to know, what was the catalyst for you to take that first step to say hello to grief and to like can you remember that point when you were like, okay, whether it's I'm grieving, this is what I want to do, and how did you recognize that? Like, what was that moment for you when I feel like you had the opportunity to say hello?
I mean, I didn't know I was grieving, you
Mm,
know? I'm 30, I'll be 38 soon. I left my job when I was 34. And I think for like 30 something years, I was just crying and, suffering and struggling and just feeling like, what is this darkness inside of me? Like, am I just like dark and, destined for this kind of existence where nothing feels light or things are going great in life, but this confusion that you feel, people from the outside are like, oh, you have such a wonderful life, but you
mm,
just know deep within you that things are just not the same, or there's just this heaviness that you carry. And so I didn't realize I was grieving until I became a palliative care nurse and I started to see how grief manifests so differently. So grief is not about, someone dying. It
mm,
can be so broad and diverse. It can be, I think you're mourning for what wasn't, maybe a loss, the sense of home. And I don't mean that just physically, but this idea of, safety, of being loved, you know, of being yourself, of someone just accepting and loving you. And so grief can manifest in many ways. And even you can grieve your own old self.
yeah.
So, it was in my like early 30s, I realized, wow, I'm grieving, this like, again, like I'm grieving this life where I didn't have a lot of choice in who I'd become and what I'd become, and that my life so far had been just struggle and survival. Even though, I was excelling at it and it looked like success, there was a lot of despair behind it. And that's layers of it, that's grieving for my childhood, the way I was raised, my ancestors, my family, like what they had to go through. I come from a family of artisans and artists, but post-colonial, post-colonization, and also a lot of things that happened in our family. They just, again, survival. They became engineers or tradespeople, but all of that, and then the choices you end up making, I had to choose to become like a nurse. Like I didn't choose that out of like, this is exciting or I'm passionate or interested. I obviously did a very good job at it. I liked it. I was good at it, but it wasn't like a choice I made. So every step of the way, I realized I didn't really have, this like freedom or idea to explore. I just had to do it because we have to survive. We have to make it. We moved all the way to the US for you to, study.
Yeah.
So what may look like on the outside, wow, it's so impressive, you've achieved so much, there's also a huge loss of that sense of exploration, creativity, identity. And, that takes a huge physical toll too. This deep anxiety and your nervous system being in overdrive, that has a huge impact on your sense of rest, your sense of safety, how you perceive the outside world. So I think, people who are grieving, we live in many universes all at the same time. And then you
Yeah.
have to show up and perform, right? Which is, you're like, can I just like shut off and go lie down like for the next 5 years? Like, I just don't want to talk to anyone.
That reset button and start over. And I mean, I think even what you're talking about, is I'm always talk about my identity and being a daughter of an immigrant, even understanding, how culture plays a part in this. And also, it's like, I think even wrapped up in my identity and like who I am now, and tying that to grief because I can look at grief through so many lenses. But let's say like my dad is a black man from the poor South, right? And he tells us all his stories. My mom is an immigrant from the Philippines, also became a nurse, right? And there's a lot in there to where there are these expectations culturally on what you do, what's deemed successful, how you provide for your family. And I'm wondering, because I know that you talk a lot about grief and culture, what is the importance in this? But then also, how do you think people can address grief with family when we're also talking about being raised in such different cultures, right? Like you talked about coming here to the US, but I'm sure your family still has very strong ties, like understanding the culture, because I know I can relate in a way like that's how my mom is, right? Like my mom still has very strong ties to the Philippines, and but coming here to the U.S. and raising a daughter here in the U.S., like we're different people. And I guess how do you um, look at culture and grief through those lenses?
Yeah, wow, such a good question. I feel grateful that I did have the chance to grow up in India, even though it was a complicated childhood. But I do feel very connected and steeped, in my culture. And a lot of that is around rituals, around food, how we cook, how we eat, and just the like importance that plays in our life. And you take away sort of all the like sexism and all the tragedy, tragic
How can you?
layers. Yeah, you can't, obviously not. But then there are layers of, a lot of our culture is rooted in pleasure and nourishing your senses. That's sort of at the heart of Ayurveda or Indian culture too, apart from all of the toxicity that is overlaid onto it. So if you can get to the, just like dust off everything, there is this sense of you're almost like the swaddling, you know, again, get rid of the toxic family dynamics. But a lot of the culture is rooted in tending to your body, really, to your senses. And I think about that so much of how we think of grief as very either intellectual or we ignore it. And so we don't have to deal with it. But our body, is a place where it shows up every day, all the time. It's with our breath, in your face, in your smile. You can look at people's eyes and you can, you know, read their inner emotional universe. So, our body doesn't lie. And I feel like the more and more we can attune to that and just ask ourselves, like, what am I needing? And we don't have to get super technical and, go into these like sort of like psychological, biological terms. It could just be, how does my breath feel? How does my belly feel? Did I poop today? Like, was that satisfactory? Like,
Yeah.
am I hungry for something? And taking away the shame and all of that. And I talk about food a lot in my work. We use, food as ritual and as a source of nourishment. And the current culture we're in, there's so much, there's so many rules about like eating, clean eating, and health and wellness all wrapped into it. But we eat because we're emotional beings. I mean, we eat to sustain ourselves because we need energy, but we eat a lot of the times because of our emotions. And
Yeah.
I feel like emotional eating is such a dirty word. And, there's so much shame around emotional eating. Like, what if we actually used that term and embraced it? And, for most of us, for majority of us, our body, when we, just go with its craving and its intuition, we're not going to be eating cake like 24 hours a day for like 365 days. Like, your body will say enough.
Felt like that. Felt like
So I think we have to just get away from what is like guilty pleasure, what's unhealthy. Just eat everything and your body will find its balance. It's okay. Like if you are craving chips, you're craving salt because you're depleted in other ways. So it's something underlying. It's not just because, people I think it's because we don't trust ourselves anymore.
yeah.
And when you can really trust yourself, you will give your body what it's craving and it will find its balance in whatever way. And, that's a freeing way to be, that you can just trust, yes, I can eat chips, I can eat cake, maybe I'll eat some greens, that feels good. Your body will just start craving what it wants and it'll crave the rainbow, you'll feel balanced. But I think we exist in such sort of these, again, like very strict margins, either like meal prepping or fasting. I don't know. There's so many diets every like 20 minutes.
I would love to ask, because this is really striking a chord with me because it kind of like blew my mind a little bit when you just talked about like emotional eating isn't a dirty word, right? Like how and there is a lot of shame put on that because from my personal experience after my sister died, I didn't expect the craving part. I
Mm,
under the lies, right? If we go back to the lies, that like I would be so sad that I wouldn't eat. And
mm,
I was actually preparing myself for that. I was like, okay, you're not going to eat. You're probably going to lose a lot of weight. That's okay. Right. But then on the other side of it, I did not expect that I was going to be an emotional eater. And that's something that I feel like I have learned or I feel like has developed with my grief that I ate. Like I ate, I gained the grief weight, like but there was shame and I also especially being a former athlete, like just being so into my body that way. Um that was very challenging for me to and it still is. But just hearing you talk about that, it's like I'm processing it all like live right now just because you know, I don't know if I really connected the shame piece to it and all the guilt, right? And understanding like yes, like I made the joke about I would eat cake all the time, but yeah, I'm going to stop myself. I guess I would ask like when cuz I'm also a encourager of people to say do whatever, feels good to you, right? And that goes along with the eating. But when does it become I think like detrimental or when should people like pay attention to that.
yeah, I guess I'm just not that worried about it because our definition of just existence is so narrow. The beauty culture tells you, there's like one way to be beautiful, to look a certain way. Our body culture tells us you can only exist like this. Even mental health, you exist like this. In a capitalist economy, you can only work and exist like this. So our way of just breathing and staying alive is very narrow. And again, it's very, very conditional. And a lot of us find that we're trying to fit into this very narrow way. And most of us are burning out from the inside. And that usually leads to these kinds of extreme ways of coping. And that can
Yeah.
be, through many forms. It's like whatever it is. It's, dieting, eating, not eating, drinking, not drinking, um, dissociating at the heart of it. It can show up in many ways. I'm not saying one is bad or one is good. It's just we're all dissociating. I mean, like what it's like my guilty pleasure is to follow, TikTok people talking about health and wellness. And half the time I'm just, cringing about intuitive fasting and whatever else. And, that's a form of dissociation, right? Like, why that sense of deep control? I feel like there's health, general level of health and feeling good and wanting to age well and feel good. That's a good goal to have. But I think our society is so, we're striving in everything for this kind of perfection that we're just depleted and hungry for connection, hungry for literal food, because most people are just denying themselves any sense of balance, any sense of compassion, any sense of just ease.
Yeah.
I felt so strongly while I was in the US, I have to try so hard for everything, for everything. And there's such a huge toll, especially folks of color that carry that.
Yeah.
And it feels like anything short of that is failure. And I think for a lot of us, grieving feels like failure
Wow.
because we cannot perform and be quote unquote strong, skinny, beautiful, all the external markers, not emotional. But we don't have to be the opposite, is what I'm saying, that it comes in waves and it's a cycle. And we can just find newer, softer ways of being and know that maybe, for many years, that is the way your body will feel and look. But it's also proof of like what you've been through, what you've been able to endure and come out of it. And there is a lot of other kinds of beauty that exists, beyond, again, that rigidity that we're all trying to fit into.
Yeah. It makes me think of like the words that kept popping in my head are like it's non-binary, but then also it's this idea of impermanence, right? And I think if death teaches us anything, is like nothing's permanent. And so whether you're talking about these waves, and that's it too, right? It'll come and go. Maybe one day you're like, this is what I'm craving, and another day it's not. And being able to even have this awareness, because I do think that's also something I learned is I became more aware when I was feeding my grief instead of just like doing it aimlessly. And then once I was able to have that awareness, I was then able to tap into other awareness of other things that I felt like this would be really good for you to do, and this would be really good for you to try, whether it was food or whether it was anything else. Yeah, it's really good. I love all the light bulbs and things that are going off right now. Um, I do want to, as we're talking about food, um, I know that, we've all heard the term soul food and how it feeds our soul. And I'm sure that this translates to so many communities and people and cultures. Tell us more about your own, because I know you host different events and you do different practices with healing through food. Can you tell us more about that? Because I'm sure people would love to attend, people would love to learn more, and people would love to engage in that practice and ritual around food.
Yeah, through Marigold, we've been hosting monthly series called Gathering, and it's a way to connect over, shared stories. If you're grieving, if you're, wanting to reconnect, if you're wanting to remember, it's just this sort of imaginary virtual table where people come. We usually have a recipe that we're making. We made chai recently for July. We're celebrating 1 year anniversary of Marigold. And when my co-founder came to Barcelona last year, as we were, starting our company, we'd worked so hard all week. It was so hot. And we went out and got saffron gin tonics. And we were also eating samosas and gulab jamuns. And that's just like this like holy trinity of like flavors. um, so we just wanted it to be sort of like celebratory and festive. So we're doing a saffron gin tonic and rose things, around the theme of that this year. And we're trying to, go deeper into not just thinking about food, as a way to be like hedonistic or frivolous, but it's
Mhm.
a conversation starter, right? Like everybody, I may make chai and someone else, one attendee came, they'd never had chai in their life, but they were talking about, this ritual of making coffee, how their mom made coffee for them.
Mm.
They made it a certain way. It was like Folgers and, not like this third wave fancy coffee, but it was just the way their mom made it for them and the ritual of it, the what it conveyed, when someone makes something for you and the way it turns out. You know, like most of my day depends on how good my chai came out. If it didn't have the right balance of ginger or cardamom, like my day's thrown off. So and that means if I didn't make it with presence, right? And that nurturing care that I offer to myself. So it's very subtle and little, but it can really, set the tone for your day and how you connect. And we're really excited because during the pandemic, I worked on a cookbook for, as a fundraiser, but it was a cookbook on recipes for grief, how to nurture and, mend and nourish your heart. And that was such a huge success. It was a community cookbook, and all these people that I didn't know, some people I knew, my mom, so many people contributed recipes, and it was such a great hit. And I thought, we're so hungry for this way of
Yeah.
connecting that we're starting offering, workshops and even services for people to make their own family cookbook because there's
Lovely.
just every family has their, to me that's like sort of our superpowers, that's our strength, that's our culture, our language of love, our language for caring. We may, my parents or no one in my family asks like, how are you feeling? We just say, did you eat? Are you still hungry? Is your stomach hurting? Like you have to recite everything you ate, and then your mom judges you for, not eating enough greens or, eating like whatever. She's like, oh, like and that is a marker for how you feel, right? Like what you
Yeah.
eat and how you digest is so much of your mood. And so she'll be like, oh, you need this, you need that, did you make that? So that's our way of speaking.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Sometimes your family is able to meet you emotionally, but they can also care for you in so many other ways.
Mm.
And we really wanted to codify and archive that. And especially so many people, folks of color, we don't have cookbooks that we inherited from our grandparents. We don't have this like record and archive of our cultural inheritance. So I felt, very strongly that as a community, if we can start making, maybe it's like even collaging 10 recipes that mean something to you, that is
Right.
the blueprint for your wellness and sustenance. What a great way to like gift that, have it for yourself. So we're really growing out that program of, your family cookbook memoir series. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm really excited about.
That's,
Yeah.
it is when you're talking about food and that connection. it also, and the storytelling, right? Like people are going to have their stories of how these recipes were made, who taught them. Um, and, and when you watched, whoever it was cook, because for me right now, I've been really thinking about my parents' stuff. I've been thinking about they're getting older and how can I take a piece of them or hold on to a piece of them through the food. And so I've been asking my dad for his recipes of like black eyed peas. Like that was something he grew up with. And so I've been able to make that myself. And what's really like it heightens your senses and it just taps back into the memory because when I cook it and I eat it and you try to get it to taste the same or to have those flavors, um, it's that home feeling what you're talking about. It's that like, oh yes, this is it. And with my mom, trying to get her to share the recipes, but it's so interesting because she's just like, I don't have a recipe. I just throw
Oh,
this in.
moms are so bad at recipes. It's like, it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. Oh, and that too, and a spoon of this. I'm like, you have to measure it. And she's like, oh, it doesn't turn out well if I measure it. So go
It's
figure.
so interesting in that I'm like, how am I going to capture this recipe and do that? And then also just my mom would also the medicinal purposes, right? Like there's this Filipino dish called arroz caldo, and it's pretty much rice and chicken. It's the Filipino chicken soup. And so I remember her giving that to me as a child. And now when I'm sick and I'm older, I'm like, oh, like a bowl of that would just be like really great, because it has the ginger in it, all of that stuff. And I'm just like, okay, well, how am I going to make that recipe? How am I going to pass it down? That's also something too, like the generations to come after, because there could be this fear of like, how do like we lose that, right? And I think that connection through food can it be exactly what you're talking about. It could be celebratory. It can capture the memories. It could help you feel, all those feels again and stay connected to our loved ones in that way. And food is communal. That's where we are able to share and to feed other people's souls in the midst of it.
Yeah, and it's also so simple. It's so primal, and for a lot of us, English, this language, this concept of language, how we communicate was also imposed on us. It's not out of our choice. It's not even really original or part of our bones or body, right? So I feel like we're trying to like sort of haphazardly, not haphazardly, but whatever we're communicating, we're only communicating like 50% of it. But when
Mm,
you do it through, the music or the textiles, the smells, the foods, that really captures everything. And it's
yeah,
evoking, people you haven't talked to that you can't even communicate with.
yeah.
So many like grandchildren, grandparents, right, may not speak the language. But through
Yes.
this food, you can be like, this is me, this is my identity, this feels, I fit right into this.
Yeah.
And I think these are very simple, but also wild and big, dreamy ways in
Yeah.
which we can just belong and,
Yeah.
feel less alone.
I like that. You made me in an instant, like right away when you said they don't speak the same language. My grandma didn't speak English or much English, and she came over to live with us in the States for a little bit. And yeah, I remember as a kid, like we didn't know what we were saying to each other, but she would just be like, eat. Like, I mean, she'd tell me in Tagalog, but like I knew what she was saying. And I understood and I understood that it brought joy to her to like watch me, eat the food or taste the food. And probably now thinking about it, probably brought joy to her that she could share her culture, with me or my culture as well. So being able to pass that on. So really beautiful everything that you've been saying today. And so I'm
So
extra
you're
extra.
cooking, right?
I know,
It's dinner time for me. So
I
where's my
know.
arroz caldo? Yeah, I'm waiting.
Okay, so I'll close here, and I like to close with two questions. that I've been asking all the guests so far. So the first question is, if you were to say hello to someone today who is grieving, what would you say to them?
I would say, slow down, just like really slow down. If you can turn off the world around you and just touch your head, touch your face, touch your belly, and just get in touch with your body again. And, just be curious to what comes up.
Thank you. And then the second question is, if you were to say hello to your own grief today, what would you say?
Oh, that's really hard. um, I would say, it feels like I'm lonely a lot, but I'm not alone. Like I can connect with myself. There's a lot that I can offer rather than feeling insecure and that, I'm trying to like hold out or just that sense of desperation that comes while you're grieving for comfort that exists within me. So just feeling that abundance from within myself.
It's a good reminder for you today and for all of us. So thank you so much just for everything. Like you dropped so many gems. I feel like I'm gonna have to cut and clip and put it everybody. So in closing, I just want to say I want to encourage everybody to say hello to Roshni. Go and find her on Instagram at We Are Marigolde, and that is spelled WeAreMarigolde. And then you can also find her at your personal Instagram page at and it's cardamom. Oh gosh, I'm gonna mess it up. Can you
Cardamom
say
and Kavate.
cardamom and Kavate? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna spell it out for you. CARDAMOMANDKAVATE. And then, of course, you can go to her website at wearemarigold.com. I encourage you to do that. Go say hello to her there. And to close out today, if grief has taught me anything, it is that our time is our most valuable resource. So thank you for giving your time today. Thank you for taking the time to say hello to grief today. There are so many people in this world grieving the loss of someone or something. And it's not my goal to reach every single one of them. It's simply to reach one. And I hope that person is you. I hope you took at least one thing. I know I took many from today's podcast. And I hope that it helps you on your journey. Take the time to say hello to your grief today. And better yet, say hello to someone else because you never know who you'll be greeting in their grief. And I would love to say hello to you. So follow me at Hello I'm Grieving on Instagram or Threads and let me know what resonated with you and what topics you would like to learn more about. Until next time. And I look forward to saying hello.
Hi. Finishing with saying hello.
Go ahead and stop that. We'll stop the recording.